I think and talk about sex and drugs all the time. So how can I use those for healing tools for myself and for other people?
The opinions expressed by the guests of Thot Leader podcast are their own. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sx Noir, and this is the Thot Leader podcast. With industry thought leaders, this podcast aims to demystify and destigmatize topics in sex, culture, and technology. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like and subscribe. All right. Hello, everyone. Today, I have a brilliant guest with me, Shelby, and we're going to get into everything drug therapy and sex tech.
Yes.
Yeah. How are you today?
I'm so good. So happy to be here.
Good. Amazing. We're here in New York City, and we're ready to get into it. I'm so excited for this interview. I've been searching high and far for someone who navigates drug therapy. I think drug therapy is so important when we talk about transforming our sexual selves, whether through trauma, whether through pleasure. And so I'm so happy to have you here today. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what brings you here.
Yeah. I, quick and dirty version, I grew up Mormon in Utah. And so I'm like a queer poly person. So my journey from Mormon in Utah to where I am today has been a lot of like self-discovery and dealing with discrimination as far as my sexuality and navigating that. I've been married and divorced, and during that time really leaning into my pansexuality and open relationships and so much therapy. But growing up Mormon, I also was dealing with a lot of stigma, shame, judgment around not only my body, but sexuality and relationships, and really trying to parse that out. So I turned 30, I got divorced, I quit my job, and I went to grad school to be a sex and relationship therapist. And part of my journey included, I went to my undergrad was in modern dance. I came to New York because I was hired by a dance company. So I went to school for that and I danced, acted, modeled for several years here in New York, and then did a little bit of advertising, and then I went back to grad school for social work. So I'm about to graduate, very excited. And part of my journey also included doing some psychedelic assisted psychotherapy for myself to kind of to deal with some depression and work through some sexual trauma I had. And that also included doing some kink and BDSM related healing work. So I'm at the point now in my life where I'm bringing all of my passions and past life experiences together to create a future that, I think and talk about sex and drugs all the time. So how can I use those for healing tools for myself and for other people?
That is so incredible. I actually maybe you told me this. I didn't know that you used to be Mormon.
Oh, yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible, the journey. Wow.
Yeah, thank
wow.
you.
Yeah, I have a few Mormon friends, and let me tell you, it's just, living in New York, you encounter so many different people, and we're such a melting pot, or mixed salad, as some may say, of different experiences. Yeah. And so that journey is an intense one. Yeah. Is an intense one.
Some, religion in general is wild, because depending on how literal you interpret the Bible or where you grew up, how you grew up, a lot of my work is also around sex education. And because it's not mandated on a national level, it's on a state-by-state basis. And some states that are very conservative and have a really high religious population, like a dense population of religious folks, like Christians, for example, if it's a very Christian conservative state, the likelihood of their sex education being inclusive, comprehensive, and or even talking about things like consent, absolutely not. So growing up Mormon in Utah, my sex education was very poor, and it influenced how a lot of my early experiences. It influenced how I engaged with relationships, what I thought a relationship was, and the trajectory of it. So I've spent most of my 20s and early 30s completely dismantling that for myself.
What drew you to do drug therapy? I mean, I love sex, drugs, and rock and roll
Yes.
on a personal level.
Yes.
I do. But what led you to say, okay, this could actually be therapeutic in the right setting for me personally?
Yeah. During COVID, growing up, I was very adamant in my rebellion towards religion and community and all of those things. And so I've dabbled in and out of recreational drug use for a long time. During COVID, I got COVID, had to isolate for a long time, and my mental health completely crashed. And so I was exploring alternative methods because I've been in therapy, like psychodynamic psychoanalytic therapy for 20 years, but talk therapy can only get you so far. And so I was looking for alternative methods, and I ended up doing, so I was microdosing a lot and kind of led myself through a preparation and integration process. And I did a lot of research on how to create a set and setting for myself. What are my intentions? And I started through doing microdosing with psilocybin mushrooms, and then doing some like bigger trips on my own, because I'd had really beautiful transformative experiences on psychedelics before, but I didn't really know what to do with that afterward. So I did the research for myself before I embarked on those experiences for myself. And now I'm in the process of doing that and getting further training to do that for other people.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting you brought up, this idea that we all do have our own personal experiences with different types of drugs and different experiences, but it takes that intentionality of saying, okay, you know what, actually talk therapy can only go so far. I've been in talk therapy for 7 years now, and God bless, like I love it. But I also am considering, moving forward into something else that can help be a more transformative experience. And as we know, these ceremonies around mushrooms and psychedelics and things like that have been used for eons. It's ancient medicine, but it's also this intention that has to go alongside with it. And so that's amazing. Now, could you tell us more about the different types of drugs that are used for drug therapy that you are navigating?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some classic psychedelics like mushrooms, things like that. Some of the things that you mentioned, but used culturally in different indigenous communities or for religious purposes, things like that, like ayahuasca, DMT, where when you get it from the toad properly. But then now, like MDMA was developed in a lab in the early 1900s, and so those there's the classic psychedelics that come from the earth and things like that, and then an ayahuasca. But then you have these this different category of compound, MDMA, ketamine, LSD, that are developed in a lab. And so they all have these different effects, if you will, which is something that I, in my research and in my hopefully moving forward research, will look at, because I was just about to finish grad school, and I spent a full semester doing research on psychedelics and PTSD and trauma. And it's really interesting because certain compounds provide different reactions. Some are more dissociative and some are more associative. And the reason that it can be so transformative is because if it is dissociative, then you can take a traumatic experience, and where in talk therapy, you are in it, you're feeling it, can sometimes be, taken back in a PTSD episode, experiencing it in a different way. But then if you're doing psychedelics, it has this effect where it can kind of depersonalize it, and you can hold it outside of yourself, and you can give yourself grace and compassion, and do some of that deeper healing work that isn't always available to you in a non-altered mindset, because what happens is when you take a psychedelic, one of my favorite ways to explain psychedelic therapy was described to me by Mary Casamano, who is one of the, she's led the most above ground psychedelic assisted psychotherapy research sessions. She's at Johns Hopkins Research Center, and she describes it as, imagine you're on a stage with your daily life and the curtain is open 3 feet in front of you. And then you take a psychedelic and the curtain not only opens, but it opens all around you. And it unlocks the parts of our brain. It takes you back to a childlike state before we had community and culture and society create all of these rules and boundaries and norms. But it unlocks it for us, and it allows us to see things in a more free, joyous, playful way. And then when your experience is over, the curtain shuts back down, but it shuts down to maybe like 6 feet instead of 3 feet. And during that time period, that's a really prime time for integration, where you can rewire some of those experiences, or it's really amazing for habit forming, habit building. That's why psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is so amazing for things like addiction, because you can break habits and you can create new ones, or break thought patterns and create new ones. And so hopefully in the future, I would love to see specific compounds being used for specific things, because right now in New York, you can do ketamine assisted psychotherapy. There are ketamine clinics where you can go and have a session, but you can't do that with psilocybin. You can't do that with MDMA. But what if MDMA would be better for someone's trauma or someone's experience or someone's specific issue that they're coming in for? And so hopefully in the future, that will be something that, you know, you like walk into a clinic and you're like, this is my problem. And they say, this is the best compound for you. It's like an SSRI or like an antidepressant, anything like that. So I hope that's where the future will take us. We'll see.
No, we've all seen the ketamine therapy advertisements on our Instagram. Instagram, leave me alone. Stop coming for me.
And it's wild though, because it's so expensive, and it makes it so unaccessible to the true community, like the people that, I mean, no one's trauma is more or less than the other, but communities and people who could really, really benefit from it. I think I saw one treatment that was like $2,500, and I was like, who's paying that?
Yeah.
Who can afford to pay that?
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll also see more affordable options. Or even I was attending a conference last fall called Horizons, where a researcher from Columbia was talking about hopefully insurance companies will someday soon be helping provide that care.
Now, I have personally tried hallucinogens.
Yes.
And recreationally and intentionally in different settings. And so what would you say for those who are listening of like, well, I've had the craziest ketamine trip last week at the Brooklyn Mirage, and it was amazing and it was transformative. What's the difference between that and the work that you do? Time, space, quantity, all those things.
Yeah. I mean, even that experience at the Brooklyn Mirage can be just as transformative and healing. Being in community and dancing, moving your body, huge. It is that time frame between the like 6 and 3 feet when like afterward. So you can go and have a really beautiful healing experience, but then how do you use that time afterward, or even the time before? Oftentimes it's called the set and setting. And so that's why when people are talking about going and doing mushrooms in the forest, because it's such a different experience than doing it if you're walking around New York City. So that's your setting. You want to make sure it's intentional. What is the soundtrack to your experience? What kind of clothes are you wrapping your skin in? Sometimes it's really amazing to like make sure you have something very comforting and familiar. And then your set. What is your intention? And I talk about set and setting in preparation for someone's experience, and then afterward to the set and or your intentions are like the seeds. And then you have your experience, and then after you have the seeds, the integration work is usually the talk therapy and the, I talk about set and setting in preparation for someone's experience, and then afterward to the set and or your intentions are like the seeds. And then you have your experience, and then after you have the seeds, the integration work is usually the talk therapy and the, I talk about set and setting in preparation for someone's experience, and then after you have the seeds, the integration work is usually the talk therapy and the deliberate actions and thought changes that you're making in the aftermath of it. So it's how you water the garden, how you water the seeds, and that will be the garden or the forest that you grow after to wander through, to like enhance your life and make these changes. And so how it affects it, it's like because I can't legally offer someone drugs right now. So usually how I work with it is people will have their own compounds and I can help them do the preparation work. It's a lot of intention setting. It's a lot of talking through possible, like, what is our game plan if something starts to not feel right? Who's sitting with you during it? Because it's usually, you want to have someone that you love and trust sitting with you if it's not me. And then there's some really amazing harm reduction resources, like Fireside Project is a resource that is an app and a hotline that you can call if you're having a bad trip, whether recreationally or in the middle of a session. It's a really amazing resource to have. And other harm reduction resources, like, like test your drugs and have a sitter and do your homework. If you're doing psychedelics recreationally and you're anticipating or you're going through something big in your life, like, be aware of it. Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot of the things I do. A lot of like journal entries, a lot of self-care, making sure that you're for example, clients that go away to go to big ceremonies, whether it's psilocybin or ayahuasca, we do a preparation, but they usually have to be on a specific diet beforehand. Are you sleeping? Are you eating well? How are you treating your body? Are you drinking a lot? Or what is your water intake? Like, your vessel, like, if your physical body is not prepared, then your mental and emotional state won't be at the peak to have those transformative opportunities.
Yeah, you're really destigmatizing and demystifying this conversation, right? Like, this is huge. I think that building empathy around drug use is really, really important. Because a lot of people do drugs, whether it be recreational, whether it be intentional, whether it be for transformative reasons. And I love that you are bringing just these very valid, real life conversations to it. And I know it's like, we live in New York, but it's not even about New York. It's about everywhere in the country. Everyone's doing these hallucinogens or different types of drugs in that way. And
to connect with each other too. Like, we do MDMA when we go out dancing to like a rave, but that's a community experience. And that's there's another researcher, her name is Gold Dolan, and she was talking about like couples therapy or group therapy and doing that in a group setting, and like how beautiful that is to heal as community, because especially in America, we're so individualistic and like this whole every man for itself. But what if we came together and we had these healing experiences? It's transformative.
Yeah, 100%. And something I love also about your work, you've done research papers around BDSM and pleasure. And I'd love to get more into these journeys of working through trauma or working through pleasure. And they can be one and the same in many different settings. Yeah,
huge. I did another big research several months on BDSM and trauma, and blanket statement, there's not a lot of research on it. So there's so much more to be done, BDSM and kink. And so how kind of what I was looking at is whether or not people who had experienced trauma or childhood trauma had a predisposition towards kink and or BDSM, or a specific type of kink or BDSM. And the answer is no, not necessarily, because there's so many reasons why a person would identify as kinky or a person would be drawn to BDSM, which is, and I know you know, but for any listeners who are not aware, you can be kinky and participate in the BDSM community, or you can just be kinky and not, because BDSM is where the power play and the power dynamic ends it.
And what does BDSM stand for?
BDSM is an acronym for bondage, dominance, sadomasochism, and masochism. Or dom sub, like that's where we get our domination and submission in there. And so there is that power dynamic where there is one person who is more dominant and has power over the other person. And of course, consensual, with consent and lots of conversations and things navigating safe. RAC is an acronym often used, risk-aware, consensual play. I'm going to have to get you the correct breakdown for that one.
100%.
But because so many people can be drawn to those things for so many reasons. And one of those is to heal from trauma, because if you have the opportunity and capacity to, it's like reenacting a specific type of scene or scenario where you need to practice, or you have the opportunity to set your boundary. You have the opportunity to say your yeses, to say your nos in a very specific container of safety with people that care about you and respect you. And so it's about reclaiming your power. It's about having a say over that. And within that realm is turning your pain into pleasure, because the pleasure pain dynamic is very real. It's a chemical component, it's a psychological component. And then how transformative that can be for someone. But other people are drawn to kink and BDSM because it is sexy, because it is fun, because it takes you out of your element of your daily life. And then, I mean, I've been very clear with the world that, like, I was watching the second Aladdin, The Return of Jafar, and I thought it was so sexy when Jafar tied Jasmine up and forced him to feed her, and I was like, that's it, I'm done. It's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I'm gay and kinky now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think I was like 8 years old, 7, younger. So it's also what we're exposed to, right? But within that is, I was like, she's wearing some sexy lingerie, she's feeding him, she's tied up. This is great.
I mean, sexy too. It's kind of funny. Like I love growing up Pinky in the Brain, like that kind of just like very like, oh, like just these power dynamics, right? And I've always enjoyed seeing that. Like we navigate that within our friendships, within our relationships, within our family dynamics, within our work dynamics.
It's the first thing that we know with our parents.
Yeah.
It's what we experience and it's what we see. Mm-hmm. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I want to get into, I'm loving this conversation, by the way. It is so good. It's just like, I can talk to you all day about this stuff. It's amazing.
We need to catch up.
I know. We need to catch up about a lot of things. About love, life, lust. So if you haven't already done enough, you're also an intimacy coordinator.
Yes.
And this is a, dare I say, new emerging field that we've seen. Mm-hmm. And this is a beautiful, amazing thing that's happened. Could you go into like, where did intimacy coordination stem from, and what made you want to get into it and make a change in that world?
Intimacy coordination is fairly new. It kind of came out of the Me Too movement. So really started to take hold in about 2017. And out of the need for artists to have advocates on set. So my job as an intimacy coordinator is to be the liaison between actors, directors, and producers to ensure everyone's consent is being upheld, boundaries, making sure that there's responsible storytelling for sex, and that if there is a queer story that we're telling, a queer love story, a queer sex experience, that is told accurately, that is there an anal scene? Where's the lube? Like making sure that those things are being upheld, and are everyone's pronouns being used correctly? The crew members, like there may be a really like traumatic sex scene happening. Is the crew comfortable with this? Is there someone who's not giving their consent to be a witness to what we're portraying, to the story that we're telling? So making sure that not only the actors and actresses, or the actors, period, and crew is safe, but that a responsible, ethical storytelling is also being upheld. And so I came to it because my background is in dance and performance and acting and modeling, and now my life in mental health and advocate work for sex relationships, and because I primarily treat the queer population, that's what the queer, kinky, open, non-monogamous population, that's where I identify, and so upholding those folks and those experiences is important to me. So coming into intimacy coordination is kind of like my perfect dream of being in entertainment and being able to choreograph sex scenes and make sure that everyone is good about it. And also, again, going back to what I touched on earlier, sex education, so many people learn about sex through entertainment and media. And so how can I kind of infiltrate that from the inside and make sure that we're telling those true stories of sex and relationships?
100%. We need that so much. Like absorb so much from everything that we watch on television and that we're streaming now. Everything is just on the snap of our finger. We can see anything we want.
Music videos.
Yeah.
How is everyone on set treating each other? How are they experiencing intimacy?
And this is like a different level of kind of sex tech because it's kind of techie, right?
Oh my God.
The positioning, how is it written into the script? Like, how is it portrayed? Like, it's very technical how these scenes are portrayed because it's not necessarily real life. It's an acting. It's a portrayal of something. Exactly. But we want it to resemble real life as best that we can so that it can be harm reduction. I love that you bring up so much about harm reduction.
Yeah.
You are harm reduction personified, okay? Like
Trying.
Yes, you are. And, harm reduction, for those who are listening, I personally, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, put it on my gravestone, there's no such thing as a safe space.
No.
All we can do is create safer spaces by implementing harm reduction tactics. I think the queer community is pretty tuned into that conversation. Kink, BDSM is pretty tuned into that conversation that trauma happens. Yeah. And whenever I have conversations for this podcast or for anything, I always guarantee, hey, like, I don't know if something might come up. And this is why I always have a preface conversation going, here's what happens. If something does come up, take a breath, grab some water, you can take a little walk or but what I don't say is, it drives me crazy. It's my biggest pet peeve is when I go into spaces, it's obviously very not queer or women centered when they go, this is a safe space. And I'm like, that just does not give you the mindset and the liberty to feel things that could be harmful that come up or difficult, emotions that could come up. So I wanted to dive a bit more into drugs, because I love conversation on drugs. And I think there's a reason why we do drugs. And I wanted to go into what is like the current state of what drugs you can and can't work with. I know we kind of mentioned that you can work with ketamine, you can't work with MDMA or mushrooms. Like what does that look like and how do you feel about that?
I want to touch really quickly on what you said about safe spaces. I love that you said that. Something that in some of the advocacy groups and some of my mentors have spoken a lot about that. And we cannot ever say that we are a safe space for someone. You have no idea even what my image to someone can bring up in someone else without me even saying or doing anything. My presence could just be activating to someone. So I've been in communities and I've been in spaces where they say we're trying to create a brave space or a courageous space or something to those lines, but like saying something is safe is not. So I appreciate you saying that. Also, risk-aware consensual kink. I knew it would come. And drugs. I just love. So it's super interesting. The conversation around psychedelics is happening so quickly, and it's on a state-by-state basis, similar to sex education. So in New York State, marijuana was recently decriminalized, and great, amazing. Psilocybin's interesting. You can buy the spores, but you cannot grow them legally, is what I most recently read, updated. But you can't go to a clinic and they will not give you a psilocybin for a trip. It's only in research facilities right now. You can do ketamine, and that's usually through a IV. But again, right now it's super expensive and you can't go in for a one-off dose. It's usually a package deal. And MDMA is quickly coming. So MAPS is the main organization that kind of leads all of the psychedelic assisted or the tests around that. So right now there's countless research trials around depression, anxiety, PTSD, things around eating disorders, addiction. So those things are happening in different trial settings. And if you are interested, you can go to the website and see if you're eligible to be part of a trial, because that's a really feasible way for some people to get treatment.
Yep.
But it is on a state-by-state basis. So ketamine is legal to do right now, but MDMA, LSD, DMT, psilocybin are not legal. So you're usually getting them from hopefully trusted sources.
Test your drugs.
And make sure that you're communicating with your dealers. I think that working with dealers is huge to talk about harm reduction. If you're buying them, ask them if they test it and what their source is. And be part of community. There's Brooklyn Psychedelic Society is a really great resource. They have trip tales, and you can get together with a community of people and get support, listen to other people's experiences. They do, shamanic breath work. They have a ketamine tennis event coming up. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm very excited.
This is the most Brooklyn shit I've ever heard of in my life. Let me tell you right now, I'm not surprised for a moment.
No,
Ketamine tennis, absolutely, absolutely.
No, there's several other. I'm speaking about Brooklyn and New York City specifically because that's where we are, but so many different organizations and support groups and folks who are really trying to bring these opportunities and these compounds to more people who can access them, who need them. Because if you can buy ketamine off the street, you can buy all of these drugs off the street, but A, you want to make sure it's safe. B, do you have the resources to ensure you're doing it in a way that is going to give you the maximum impact, or like what you're, you can go into it with whatever intention you want, but it's the medicine will do the work. Mm-hmm. The medicine will unlock what it needs to, but it's what you do with it.
I think, I think not maybe the new generation, but just our world right now is becoming it's so less taboo to talk about these impacts of the drugs. It's so less taboo to say, you know what, I took MDMA to party and have fun with my friends and seek pleasure. Yeah. Or, you know what, I was having a really difficult night. I took ketamine so that I could take myself out of that pain for a moment and look at it objectively. Yeah. There's so many different reasons why people will do drugs. We're talking about different kind of drugs like hallucinogens, of course, right now. And I think they can be incredibly powerful for self-discovery, and especially around sexuality. So, so let's end on the note of kind of talking more around sexual awakening, whether it be pleasure, whether it be trauma, working through that using hallucinogens. And so what have you seen or experienced that has been really transformative around drug use and sexuality?
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought up saying the word pleasure in itself is an act of advocacy.
Hell yeah.
Because when we look at capitalism and colonialism and who is in power and the dissemination of information, that is those are the gatekeepers to who gets to know what. And so much about that is our bodies and our pleasure and our bodies and what we can do with it. I get back to sex education. There's less than a quarter, I think it's like the last time I looked, 18 states require it to be medically accurate. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about engaging with our own bodies and other bodies, we're not even talking about it being medically accurate, first of all, yet alone from a pleasure-based perspective, because we're talking about most of the time it's abstinence-based, heteronormative, and it's so damaging because it's not inclusive, comprehensive, and so many identities are being erased in the process. And so when we're talking about drug use and the good that can come of it, the 1960s, 70s was full of this like revolutionary time of free love and people engaging with these compounds and each other and having a new perspective on our bodies, relationships, drugs, and the possibilities of freedom. But then again, people in power come down and start to criminalize things, and we criminalize things in people. A lot of my research this semester was on it's very wordy. My thesis was on the ascent of Christian fundamentalists and how they impact policy making, and specifically around sex education. And so it looked, one section of the paper was looking at the victories of the queer community and now the reaction of the far right, as we see in a lot of conservative states. And as of May 8th, there was 474 anti-LGBTQ bills proposed in 2023 alone. Over 200 of those are specifically targeting schools and sex education and making it a place of fear and danger for kids to be queer at school, because if their parents don't know, the teacher legally has to out them. Or if a doctor provides gender affirming care to trans youth, then they can be convicted of a felony. And so, like, again, it's the people in power who are telling us what we can do, can't even know about our bodies, because if we're not being taught about inclusive sex ed, then we're not even aware that my experience is valid or being seen. And so then we talk about pleasure and who gets to say what my pleasure is, because if I'm not getting this education at home through my church or through school, then how am I supposed to know how to engage with my body in a pleasure-based way? Because if I accidentally, the first time I masturbated, I was in dance class, I was doing the splits, and I was like, oh, this is fun. I was very flexible as a teenager, but I didn't know that I was masturbating because my church told me that that was a sin. And so then, God forbid, I knew what was happening in my body until I was like in my 20s. Mm-hmm. And so that is a sexual trauma, to be realizing that, like, oh my God, I was like in sin. And then healing from that through psychedelic work can be my relationship to my body. And I've seen it in couple work. I've worked with a couple who did ayahuasca, and a lot of their intention going in was for further connection. And it ended up not being the outcome necessarily, because they had very individual experiences where things about, gender, like one of them was like really exploring and becoming comfortable with their gender that is on the spectrum, and like their masculine and feminine energy, and how that impacts how they view themselves and how sexual they feel. And it's just super fascinating, because the more that we can be open and curious about our experiences and other people's experiences, then we have no idea what else is available to us. And deconstructing binaries, our entire country and world really is like, yes, no, right, wrong, black, white, like everything is so binary. But my sexuality exists so far. My relationships all vary. I'm very like stable in my gender, but like my anxiety level's on the spectrum. And so
okay, yeah. Let me tell you.
Exactly. And so, like, how can we be curious about all of the other shades and textures and colors, and psychedelics open that up to you. You don't even, like, sometimes it's how it feels in our body, or sometimes it's what we see, sometimes it's when we close our eyes and what that unlocks. Sometimes it's the memories that it unlocks for us, and you're like, oh, this is why I behave this way. Oh, this is the relationship that set the stage for all of these other relationships. And it can be just such a healing experience, so that we can reclaim our power over our pleasure. Drugs.
Period.
Yes.
Period. Yeah. Well, goddamn. Okay. So I'd love to ask you, last question.
Yes.
What do you believe the future of sex technology will be?
Oof. I think there's so many possibilities, but I would really love to see how we can continue to utilize technology in a way to destigmatize, normalize, spread education. I'm really big on the sex education kick, but like, how can we get more information to communities that need it most, especially everyone in the LGBTQIA plus community? How can we create safer spaces? You mentioned that so much of my work as an IC is creating responsible storytelling through TV and film. And so I think that accessibility to how we engage with media, porn, God, I could go on forever about the social media laws and restrictions and all of that. But even because people who are trying to do this work and share, you're trying to give a platform, but how do you do that with all of these restrictions placed on you? So I hope that it's I hope to see more of that, to see more avenues of sharing information, that if we can destigmatize it, because it's truly about, like, everyone that has a body, everyone experiences these things. How can we create safer spaces to share this information? That's what I hope.
Of course.
And you're doing the work.
We're both doing the work. I'm so grateful to have you here. Well, Shelby, tell us how we can find you online and how can we support you?
My Instagram is the Shelby Terrell. And you can hit me up there. I do sex, science, and psychedelics every Sunday, where I share updates or information, usually kink related, non-monogamy related. I do Q&As, and you can hit me up there. I see patients, I see couples, I see groups of people who are in non-traditional relationship styles, so you can hit me up there. And if you're curious about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, you can shoot me a DM, and I'm happy to help.
Period. Okay, amazing. Well, thanks so much for having
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Okay. Cheers. You've been listening to Thot Leader Podcast, hosted by me, Sx Noir. Please be sure to rate, review, and share with a fellow thought leader. For more details about our guests and their work, check out our links in the description. For updates, sign up for the newsletter on my Substack and follow @sx.noir on social media. This episode's recorded by Pedro Martin and edited by Eyder Armas. As always, be thoughtful.